From initiating trade wars to enacting divisive immigration policies, withdrawing from international agreements, even from World Health Organization, and of course of Paris Accord too, Trump's actions have left an indelible mark on the nation. Now, why is Trump starting a trade war? What does he hope to achieve? How did America reach a point where trade wars, political chaos, and global isolation became the norm? Why did America choose Donald Trump?
Political beliefs, you were given money based on currying favor, like many people did.
People love me. And you know what? I've been very successful. Everybody
To
loves
understand
me.
why America chose Trump, we need to take a step back to a time when the US was the undisputed global leader, a time when the American dream was actually an inspiration, because only by looking at the past we can understand the forces that shaped America's present and what will comes next. The United States was the undisputed leader of the free world. It was the global liberator, the force that stood against fascism and later communism. US became the main architect of the post-World War II and ushered in the longest and most prosperous period in human history. Even in the Korean War and Vietnam War, most of the world framed it as a noble failures rather than imperialistic disasters. But today, something has changed. The world no longer sees America as the stabilizing force it once was. It is a nation at war with itself, standing on the edge of an uncertain future. The question is no longer, can America be saved? The question is, has America already chosen its fate? After World War II, America rebuilt the Western world. It fought against Soviet expansion and guaranteed security for its allies. It became the leader of NATO, the guardian of Europe, and the overseer of a global economy, where, as a result, the US dollar ruled the world economy and transformed into world reserve currency, the first of its kind. Most, if not all, of these events happened to rival or overcome USSR influence. Like the generational rivalry between British and French, two empires fight each other for influence and expansion, the good old imperialistic rivalry. But what happens when an empire no longer has an enemy to fight? In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and for the first time in US history, the Western world no longer faced an existential threat.
Образованием Содружества независимых государств я прекращаю свою деятельность на посту президента СССР.
The Cold War was over and the unipolar world began. During the 90s, America was uncontested, and for a decade, amidst the Russian falling into disarray, US gained total dominance on the world stage. But something began to shift beneath the surface.
Let me tell you, if we ignore human capital, if we lose the spirit of American ingenuity, the spirit that is the hallmark of the American worker, that would be bad. The American worker is the most productive worker in the world. We need to save more.
For decades, the American economy was booming in manufacturing. Factories provided stable jobs, strong wages, and a middle class that felt secure in its future. This reason are the fundamental behind baby boomers' incredible growth and prosperity. But over time, things began to change. The jobs didn't just disappear, they were exported. Corporations found cheaper labor overseas. Outsourcing was just the beginning. Then, automation replaced many workers, and technology opened new pathways for jobs, but not necessarily for everyone. And then came the rise of the H-1B visa program, bringing in high-skilled foreign workers to fill the tech jobs that American workers weren't qualified for. The middle class began to shrink and wages stagnated. In reality, US economy kept growing rapidly, but its people, especially its middle and lower class, kept faltering even farther.
Vice President, members of Congress, honored guests, my fellow Americans. We are fortunate to be alive at this moment in history. Never before has our nation enjoyed at once so much prosperity and social progress with so little internal crisis and so few external threats. Never before have we had such a blessed opportunity and therefore such a profound obligation to build the more perfect union of our founders' dreams. We began the new century with over 20 million new jobs, the fastest economic growth in more than 30 years, the lowest unemployment rates in 30 years, the lowest poverty rates in 20 years, the lowest African American and Hispanic unemployment rates on record, the first back-to-back surpluses in 42 years, and next month America will achieve the longest period of economic growth in our entire history.
By the turn of the century, the American dream began to fade for many. The promise of steady jobs, rising incomes, and a stable future gave way to deindustrialization, outsourcing, and wage stagnation. For millions, the comfort of a prosperous past seemed irretrievably lost. It was in this climate of economic anxiety and cultural uncertainty that a new voice emerged, one that promised to restore lost pride and reverse the tide of globalization. Donald Trump tapped into this deep-seated frustration with a simple, resonant slogan.
We will make America great again.
He framed the nation's challenges as a betrayal by elites, globalists, and an indifferent establishment. For many, Trump wasn't just a businessman or celebrity. He was a symbol of a promised return to a time when America's manufacturing base thrived and every citizen felt a part of the nation's success.
We need a leader that can bring back our jobs, can bring back our manufacturing, can bring back our military, can take care of our vets. Our vets have been abandoned.
The populist appeal was undeniable. Voters who had seen their communities hollowed out by economic neglect began to view Trump as the champion of the forgotten American. His rhetoric resonated, sometimes because it mirrored their pain, sometimes because it provided a simple explanation for a complex economic reality.
They didn't know the air conditioner didn't work. They sweated like dogs. They didn't know the room was too big because they didn't have anybody there. How are they going to beat ISIS? I don't think it's going to happen.
At the same time, this narrative clashed with the experiences of many who had benefited from globalization and technology. Yet the divide grew ever wider. In neighborhoods where manufacturing once flourished, the erosion of the middle class left a void that populist promises could fill, even if only temporarily.
After decades of wage stagnation and income surged, we had a surge like nobody's ever seen before.
In years leading to 2016 election, for a large segment of the population, the frustration boiled over. The economic policies of previous administrations had not provided the promised relief, and the perception that outsiders and global powers were to blame only fueled the anger.
About the office itself and about President Obama.
Well, I think President Obama was a bit naive about what he could accomplish. Washington was gridlocked then, and it is even more gridlocked.
In this environment of disillusionment, accepting Trump's message became a form of defiance, a rejection of a system that many felt had abandoned them. Thus, as America grappled with the economic and cultural shifts of the modern era, the stage was set for a political revolution. The frustrations born from years of neglect and broken promises converged, creating fertile ground for the rise of Trump and his promise of a restored American greatness. This was not just a political choice, it was an emotional, desperate grasp at reclaiming a lost identity.
The unemployment rate is the lowest in over half a century. And very incredibly, the average unemployment rate under my administration is lower than any administration in the history of our country.
The political landscape in America is increasingly fractured. The line between right and wrong, between conservative and liberal, has blurred, with more Americans viewing the opposition as enemies. January 6, 2021, a day that showed the cracks in American democracy. Thousands of supporters of President Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol, determined to stop the certification of Joe Biden's victory. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a glimpse into a potential future where the very fabric of American democracy could tear apart. The rise of Trumpism, the America First agenda, and the growing divide between urban and rural America have brought the nation to the brink.
Again, I want to thank you. It's just a great honor to have this kind of crowd and to be before you and hundreds of thousands of American patriots who are committed to the honesty of our elections and the integrity of our glorious republic. All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft.
When I think about these events, I ask myself, what is the role of the most expensive military on earth in all this? For decades, America's military has been its ultimate insurance policy, not just for defense, but as an instrument of global dominance. The US spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. Yet, when faced with internal instability, its role becomes uncertain. In an era where America's greatest threats might not come from foreign adversaries but from within, where does the military stand? For most of modern history, the US military has focused outward, projecting power across the globe, enforcing trade routes, and ensuring that America's economic and strategic interests remain intact. But now, the questions are different. What happens when the threats to American stability are no longer overseas but at home? When civil unrest, political violence, and deepening divisions threaten to tear the nation apart? We've seen glimpses of this before. The National Guard deployed during protests, the military called to restore order.
Thousands of National Guard troops brought in to secure D.C., ordered by U.S. Capitol Police to leave the Capitol, forcing many of those troops into a nearby parking garage. You see them there, many of them forced.
But those were isolated moments. What happens if these conflicts escalate? If the country fractures beyond what police forces can handle, does the military step in? And more importantly, who does it side with? America's military swears allegiance not to a president, not to a party, but to the Constitution. That has been the guiding principle. But in a moment of crisis, when a leader refuses to leave, or when part of the country rises in defiance, does that commitment hold?
Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you, I will tell you right now.
History tells us that militaries, even in democracies, are not immune to political influence. We may not have an answer yet, but one thing is clear: the role of the US military is no longer just about defending borders. It's about whether or not it will defend the very system it was built to protect.
Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process.
America stands at a crossroad, a nation built on ideals but fractured by its own contradictions. The events of the last decade have not just tested the system, they've exposed its vulnerabilities.
Donald Trump dispatched an armed mob to try to overturn the election he knew he lost.
Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about.
The question now is, does America heal, or does it continue to break apart? Some say this is just a phase, that America has always had divisions, civil war, civil rights struggles, Vietnam protests, but the system always corrects itself. Others aren't so sure. They see a country where facts are disputed, where elections are no longer trusted, where conspiracy theories hold more power than the truth. A country on the edge of something it might not recover from. As Abraham Lincoln once said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." For the rest of the world, America's decline is not just a domestic issue, it's a global one. For decades, the US has been the backbone of the international order. If it collapses inward, who takes its place? China? Russia? Or does the world descend into chaos? And yet, despite all of this, America is not a nation that simply disappears. It has reinvented itself before. It has overcome crises, scandals, wars, and economic depressions. But the real question is, does it still have the will to do it again? Or is this the moment where history begins to turn? Every empire reaches a turning point. Some rise again. Some fade into memory. What will America choose? I think America has chosen its path, for now. But America is not nation of Trump, but nation of people. Whether the country survives this moment and emerges stronger, or whether it collapses under the weight of its own contradictions remains to be seen. History is already being written. But the ending? No one knows. Thank you very much for listening to my rant. I will see you in the next one.